All right. So we are live, and I'm just going to go ahead and kick things off. And it's I don't necessarily think we're having anybody else drop in, but if we do, that's fine. So I have just a little outline. This is not meant to be super formal. It's meant to be a get to know Todd and his story and how we can connect with each other as like fellow people who are interested in positive change in medicine. But just for anybody who might be listening, my name is Gabe Charbonneau. I'm a family practice doctor in rural Montana, and I'm the co-founder of Medicine Forward. And we are a group of grassroots doctors that our mission is really about organizing to be disruptors of the broken status quo, both at the individual level and at the systemic and structural level. So I shared a little bit about what my intention is, and actually the next thing on my list is for us all to do brief intros. The other thing I had is just a check-in, which is something that I think is been a really good habit at our Medicine Forward meetings, or how everybody's doing. So I'll start with Todd. Todd, your check-in, how are you doing today?
Uh, Great. Yeah, I'm living the dream right now. I get to see all my kids' sporting events, and I had blessed with the opportunity to work on the book and connect with a lot of new people. Hoping to use my energy level to make some dramatic changes in our existing healthcare infrastructure.
Awesome. Denise, how about you?
Have to quickly get my mouse to the unmute. Sorry about that. I am doing fantastic. This is the second small group discussion in a row this morning. So I'm just lit up with excitement and similar conversations in regards to how do we pull together and make a difference. So I'm looking forward to this.
And Denise, I think everybody else got a little bit more introduction. Can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background and what you're passionate about?
Sure. So my background, I've been in healthcare for 25 years. I've done a number of different things. The last decade, I've worked in the field of patient experience. When COVID allowed me to lose my job, I decided that I needed to do something different from the outside in for patient experience, because all we've done in the last decade is truly built a barrier. We're not moving forward. We're not doing the right things. So my business is, the tagline is make a difference that makes or make a ruckus that makes a difference. Sorry, backwards on that. And I am a doctor, but a PhD, not an MD. So Gabe gratefully allowed me to join the fold, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Very much. And just another little dot that's sort of interest. So Denise is going to be speaking at the Patient Experience. Is it Symposium? It's another one of the ICD events that's through Bill Doherty that does the Burnout Symposium. So that's just an interesting little dot connection.
Yes.
Sort of Friends of Bill is an interesting network, right?
It's a growing and really good network. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm gonna just do a little introduction of some things I read off of your website, and then if you have it ready, I would love after that for you to read that little brief passage that we talked about. Do you have a copy of that so you can? Awesome. Okay, fantastic. So for those of you who don't know about Todd, he's a family physician for over 20 years time, naval flight surgeon, former ACO medical director, former chief of staff. He's involved in clinically integrated networks, advocate for the quadruple aim. He's a married father of four who has a strong faith. He's a soccer player, comic collector, crypto and NFT investor, Arsenal fan and golfer, businessman, and author. And Todd, that is quite an eclectic list. And some people might say, like, how does that all fit together? But I just want you to know that there are so many things on that list that resonate with me. Not actually, I've got a crypto mining rig in my garage that I've been tinkering with for years. So we can have an offline conversation
Oh,
about
that's
other geeky stuff sometime. But yeah, I'm so delighted that you could be here, and that the some chat from Dyke, that you could be here with us today and we can talk about your book. And as I was saying, like, my intention and Medicine Forward's intention is to really move the needle on transformation of our healthcare system to something that we feel much better about, which I think is very aligned with you and your book. There was a particular passage that I was referencing that I would love to invite Todd to read for us today. it really spoke to me. And I think that maybe afterwards we can visit about it a little bit, but it's about these moments that really can change everything for a doc when something happens. So Todd, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you read from your book.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, by the way, Gabe. This is fantastic. Before I read the passage, two disclaimers, I suppose. I used to, when I had leadership roles, say something humorous that a patient had imparted, so I'd like to do the same. I had a patient once say, I was noticing in my labs that my chloride was a little low. And they went on to say, does that mean I'm not drinking enough pool water? So I got a chuckle out of that. Unfortunately, with everybody muted, it's a little difficult to tell the reaction. But anyways, and then before I read this quote, the final disclaimer is you have to remember I was in the Navy, and there is certain language that tends to go along with being in the Navy, and I will leave it at that. So here we go. On the date of a day of chart reconciliation, I had two incomplete charts. The charts were incomplete because an MA had to check a box. Two incomplete charts as a result of two unchecked boxes. Because of this, the administration withheld my citizenship component of pay, roughly $3,000. It wasn't the money for me. It was the principle. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Gasoline had just been poured on the already smoldering cinders of burnout. Over the coming weeks, the shit hit the fan. My frustrations with work hit an all-time high. I realized my days of trying to save the world were coming to an end. I appealed the decision, but to no avail. Essentially, everything at work angered and frustrated me, and worse yet, my family and patients were not getting the best version of myself. I contemplated quitting. I cut back on patient visits. I asked for a meeting with two of the administrators regarding the decision. I had been a model physician for over a decade. No malpractice suits, and only one patient complaint in 10 years, and rarely an open chart. Despite my pleading, the decision had been made, and the explanation left me wanting. I looked them straight in the eyes. I am already thinking about quitting. This may be one of the worst fucking decisions you ever make. What are you going to do? Was the reply. Anything I fucking want. I can get a job tomorrow.
Yeah. Todd, so so I've read your book, and when I read that passage, it really spoke to me because you've heard a recording of me talking about getting fired from my first job out of residency, and there really was this pivotal moment where, like, I didn't see it coming and everything changed, and I just felt that in your words. And I felt like when I read that, I'm like, okay, well, if that's my story. And then when I talked at the burnout symposium, I had actually quite a few people surprisingly come up and say, that's my story too. And it's your story. Like, how prevalent is this that we go and we go and we go and sort of suppress all these feelings, and then one day this thing seemingly is a surprise, but it's really not. Where it's like a moment, a pivotal moment that changes everything for you. And anyway, that just really resonated with me. I don't know if it resonates with anybody else who's here. Dyke is texting us last straw. Yeah, it really is. It really is that kind of a feeling. And so I for sure want to give you a chance to talk about that, Todd. The next on my list is actually to rewind a little bit and maybe share with us some about your journey to becoming a doctor. How old were you when you first started thinking about it? What kind of kid were you? Just tell us a little bit about that story.
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Well, I guess when I was in grade school, I ran the gamut of all kinds of things. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a stockbroker, uh, maybe an engineer. And then I worked in parks and recreation as a supervisor at a school, keeping an eye on 80 kids during the summer. And I supervised a couple other individuals. And it was during that I realized I really liked the human interaction, and I love science and was good at math and so on and so forth. So I always up for a challenge. And so I decided I wanted to be a doctor. And I was pretty young. I was probably 15 or 16, I want to say, when I came to this realization. So I was the guy straight through college, straight into medical school. Um, and then, from there, I went into the Navy. And I'm obviously shortening this quite a bit. But yeah, that was the driver for me to want to be a doctor.
Awesome. And the so as far as the book is concerned, so you wrote this with a friend who is a patient. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be? How did you and Josh end up deciding that you needed to do this book together?
That's a good question, and I'm glad you asked it, because I feel like that's a key component to what we've done. Is not only are you getting the physician's perspective of what is going on in our existing healthcare system and infrastructure, but you're getting the other side with the patient, and we're weaving that together. And the synergy that we created as we went along, to me, became just more and more powerful. Um, the rewrites that came as a result of the conversations we had were just amazing, in my humble opinion. Obviously, I'm a little biased, having been a part of the process.
Mhm.
Uh, but anyways, to answer your question, the initial impetus to get Josh involved was I knew he was struggling with his health. And ironically, he was struggling with a medication that I had written him for, which ironically was the exact same medication I was taking, which helped with my post-concussive headaches. And I didn't have answers for him because it was out of my scope. And I was meeting so many obstacles for him and with him. And it was so frustrating for the both of us to try and get him to the right place. I decided to take some different approaches. And I had just started working on the book. I had really only had one, the poem Medicine is the World of Gray written, and then the chapter Anatomy of Burnout. I think it was actually around the time I first was talking to Dyke about the project. Um, and Josh is a bright guy, and he's very articulate. And I knew he had a great story up to that point, but I had only known it from the physician side of things. So he was in one day, and I kind of gave him a glimpse of what we were doing. And I said, would you want to try and be a part of this? And he said, sure. Well, what do you want me to write about? He says. And I said, just write. That's all he said.
Yeah.
Fast forward 18 months, here we are, and we finished the project. And we had one meeting after that, after I'd seen what he had produced, and it was quite good. And when we sat down and had a beer or two together, just the aligned vision of being able to come up with something that could make a difference for not just the two of us, but hopefully the collective, it was just incredible. We talked for like 3 hours. It was
Yeah.
just amazing. So sorry, that was long-winded.
No, that's fantastic. And one of the things that I loved so much about the entire premise of your book is the idea that doctors and patients alike are suffering in a broken healthcare system, and it's time for a collaboration. We are all stakeholders in wanting this and needing this to be better. And so you just jumped right in and said, like, hey, I'm going to collaborate and partner with this person who also has, from their perspective, their parts of challenges with it, but we're going to do this project together. I think it's like such an interesting perspective, and shows that doctors and patients can work together to try and make a difference. Todd, the thing that I've been dying to ask you about, because I've been thinking a lot about the quadruple aim too, is how did that first get on your radar as something that might be an important piece of the puzzle, as like maybe a guiding compass or something to look to for a way forward or a way to make progress?
That's a great question. I think I first heard about the quadruple aim in about 2016 when I was doing work with the ACO. And I had heard about the triple aim prior to that, and the premise of the triple aim I thought was brilliant, but I always felt like it was just missing something. And when I heard about the quadruple aim and that provider wellness component, I like jumped right in. I was like, this makes total sense. And I think I wrote about it. I was basically a committee of one for the better part of 6 to 12 months at our institution. I would bring it up nonstop. I would talk about wellness nonstop. And over time, I got a lot of traction, actually, to the point where in 2018, at the first Academy of Family Physicians Wellness Conference, we sent a contingent there. not just physicians, but a couple administrators as well. And it was great. A lot of great ideas. Got to see Dyke present there. And so it's just as soon as I heard about it, I adopted that vernacular. I just thought it was amazing. And then from there, we've sort of, I feel like we're trying to take it to the next level a little bit, to get the patients more involved with this and not just clinicians driving the ship to improve things. Because in my opinion, things are so dysfunctional right now. We need an army of people to
Yeah.
tackle different components of the problem.
Yep.
And I feel like what we're offering some of it's a bit of a mindset at times, I suppose, or maybe like a toolkit, if you will. It you know it's not what's right. It's not a staple gun or whatever. It's not duct tape. It's not a magic bullet or what have you. But I think there's so much potential if people had the right mindset when they get into these discussions to move towards better decision making. A perfect example, I write about it, and you might, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. When they made the decision to move my clinic and then dominoes started to fall, the decision was really financially driven, and not for a ridiculous amount of money, but nothing else was considered. And that's despite me being very transparent about wanting to get a succession plan going, wanting to get somebody to come in and join me to continue to teach the NPs. I mean, one of the chapters is called Office Utopia, and it was magical, and it all came crumbling down over a decision about money, which really broke my heart.
And probably short-term money too, right?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So there's just all kinds of like light bulbs going off in my head. One of them is Dyke, your opening about the importance of vision, and Todd, I think what you just shared, and I think what one of the things we need is a shared vision, which I think is actually what you're trying to do in the book, is say like, can we claim the quadruple aim as our own, calling it our quadruple aim, us being patients, being physicians, being people in our country and around the world. Like, can we claim ownership of that as a shared vision? Because we need some kind of a dream that compels us to act and work together and move things forward. So that was the first thing I wanted to comment. The second is this thing about you being a champion for wellness and the contagion of that. We're reading in the book club with Denise was actually there yesterday, this Mayo Clinic Strategies to Reduce Burnout. And one of the stories that struck me was this CEO of Alcoa Aluminum, who had made it his personal mission to improve worker safety and had created transformation because he was so obsessed with this idea. And I think the thing that stands out to me is that if one person can do it here and one person can do it here, there potentially is more agency, more we can change things. And I think bubbling up these stories to like show people, like so many of us like have experienced this learned helplessness, like the system is so messed up, we can't do anything to fix it. But like you hear enough stories of somebody saying, I'm going to champion this thing that's really for a better world, and it starts to catch on a little bit. I guess my hope is that there could be more positive contagion.
I agree with you 100%. We were very intentional with using the word our. In fact, there's a couple places in the book where we put a Y in front of it, to say your. There's this, and our editor was like, did you mean to put the Y in there? And I'm like, yes, we meant to put the Y in there because we would love if everybody took this notion and made it their own and made their hospital or office better than what the existing state is. And that was when we were working on the cover, and you guys have probably all seen this, but we were very intentional with the symbolism on here, with the caduceus starting the ripple. And I think if there's enough of us, and we're all out there.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are afraid to speak up. It's a culture of fear. They're worried about their jobs. Not everybody has, like said, it has the ability to do this when the time comes.
You do.
Fair. I didn't mean to put words in your mouth.
That's the thing. Everybody has the ability to do that. Every single person these days, but that's a different point.
it's a great point though. And I think, our combined forces with something like this, somebody might have the courage to say, you know what? I
Mhm.
don't like what's going on. I'm going to reach out to this coach or this coach or this person, connect the dots, speak up, and trying to do what's right, instead of what's happening all over the place, which is just, sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
No,
Obviously, I'm
no,
very
not at all.
passionate about
Todd,
this topic.
I have one other question I really want to ask you. And then I think what would be more fun, since we're a small group, is to just jump into some conversation and let Jeff and Denise and Dyke jump in and ask you things, or just kind of open up some dialogue. But so you, in my own mind, I consider you sort of a dangerous guy to the status quo, because you, one, are, as I understand it, you don't have to work as a doctor anymore. So, which means that you can say, I'm not going to put up with some of this kind of stuff. And I was actually hoping that you could tell us just a little bit about what's unique about your story and what you're doing now, because I think there's a lot of doctors who may not even consider certain possibilities like the path that that you've had.
Yeah, you could say that I maybe I don't have the gene for fear or something. I don't know. But yes, I'm not afraid to speak up. Long ago, I learned that, trying to do the right thing and being honest and fighting for what's right has served me well. And at the tail end of, my career seeing patients, for now anyways, and maybe that'll change, things that were happening were not right. And I was in a position, fortunately, not to stand for that, despite trying to speak up and advocate for what I considered to be the right things prior to that. So it's been a bit of a crazy journey the last 12 months for sure. It went from wanting to work part-time and continuing to teach the nurse practitioners because I absolutely loved seeing patients, to some decisions were made and I took a stand. I took a stand for myself. I took a stand for my colleagues. And the really interesting part of that is it basically wrote the book for me for the last 6 months, because the amount of material I had just became, it was just incredible. So then, to fast forward a little bit, as the time came near for me to stop seeing patients, that was hard. It was people I had taken care of for 13 years.
Yeah.
As many of us can attest to, that was very difficult. Saying goodbye to patient after patient after patient after patient in that capacity was very, very difficult. And then I jumped into this transition period, if you will. But the beauty of that is I had a project that I was pouring my heart and soul into with the book, that I believed we were doing something to, not only advocate for providers, but also for patients, to get our health system to a better place. And so for the next 3 to 4 or 5 months, I would spend 5 to 8 hours a day either writing or editing or having conversations and talking. In fact, near the end, my co-author, he still maintains his job, and to his credit, he let me continue to kind of push. And he was burning the candle at both ends. And Josh, he did a great job. And so you can do it. And was it scary having zero income for 4 months? Sure. But I had plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, plan E.
Yeah.
And, I told my wife, I'm like, we're going to be fine.
Todd, I gotta ask a military question somewhere along the line. I don't know if this is true, so I'm fact checking with you, that fighter pilots are taught to consider the best case, worst case, and most likely scenario when they're in like a situation that's like really like hard, important, like there's a lot at stake and you have to make a decision to kind of get yourself out of the place where you might be stuck in your thinking. Have you heard that? Could that be true?
I would imagine there's probably some validity to that. Unfortunately, I wasn't a flight surgeon for a squadron of fighter pilots, so I can't say definitively. I know several. I could just text them and ask them. But I was with P3s, which is like a big, I don't know, they switched it to 727s, I believe, and there's actually one back there. It's a big prop plane.
Yeah.
It's a sub Hunter, so it wasn't quite as
I think
Isn't
when
that
you
the
said
Orion?
plan
sexy,
A, B,
maybe. I don't
C, and
know.
D, it was just the fact that like it seemed like you kind of were able to take this challenge and make it less scary by having a multitude of like kind of contingency plans for, okay, if this happens, I could do this. And
Yeah, on that note, absolutely. And I think one of the beauties of, at least as a physician, it's not for lack of opportunity, right? I mean, I think the day I was done, I don't know how many job offers I had in the mail, on email, what have you. And even in this interval, you know, I hopped on LinkedIn for the first time and started getting job offers like immediately. So, you know, I think that fear that you're trapped in an environment that is dysfunctional, it maybe is overstated. You know, there are so many opportunities out there, so many coaches, ways to connect, what have you. You know, one of the biggest drivers, and I'll touch on this a little bit, is just the influence of suicide in our colleagues has had on me. And I don't want to have a spoiler for the book too much, but I know 3 colleagues that have killed themselves,
Mm.
including one of my partners.
Mm.
And I had no idea.
Yeah.
And that was devastating. Um, you know, and it goes to our training. And so, you know, I was thinking about, I think I was having a nightmare last night about, all right, what if they ask me about what are the metrics for the book? What am I going to come up with? And I thought about that in particular. And I thought about if we can just cut the rate of suicide in physicians in half to where it's the national average, that would be a major win
Yeah.
for not only my endeavor, but for everybody. So,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry to get,
Don't apologize at all. I mean, that's what makes this real, Todd. I mean, that's the whole reason that I show up to work on advocacy, is that I mean, these are super personal and really important things that are happening. And there's absolutely no need to apologize. In fact, it just, you know, it shows that your story is a very authentic story, and it's part of what I think is so inspiring about it. And maybe I can help just a little bit, because one of the things that I've been wanting to ask you is to just share a little bit about your dream of, because you've had some taste of it, like what medicine could look like what, you know, what in a better world, like what are we trying to get to, like paint us a picture, and your taste of it, and like how do we get there in the future so more people can experience that in a kind of ongoing way.
that is a fantastic question. So, obviously, the overarching premise of the book is what we call our quadruple aim, right? Which is patient experience, quality care, lower costs, and provider wellness. Okay. And the way I see it is when decisions are made using those 4 tenets and not just a financial driver or not just a driver in this direction, a balanced decision is typically made. So after I had gotten through burnout and taken over a new clinic with nurse practitioners, I vowed never to get burned out again. I said, I am not going through this again. And I made every effort to make our office um, live the quadruple aim. And you could feel it. You could, the energy was palpable. My staff, and I say my staff, our staff wanted to be there. And when we started, I had 3 brand new nurse practitioners, all 3 right out of training. And I was asked a couple times, you know, are you crazy to want 3 new grads or what have you? And I said, absolutely not. They're going to come in with a clean slate. They're not going to have bad habits. I can teach them how to get their charting done on time. All these, you know, delusions of grandeur at times, I suppose, but it was amazing. We laughed daily. And patients picked up on it, and I write about it in the book how humor was a part of the office. And um when I came back from vacation, how there was a big unicorn hung over my desk by the nurse practitioners, and how that made me laugh and want to be there again. And I didn't dread coming back. When one of us was off for a certain period of time, we covered for one another. All those mechanisms were in place. So it was definitely a team effort. um but it took effort, and it wasn't like flipping a switch. But when we had it going, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. It's hard to put into words. And hence why the book's like 500 pages, because there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
Um,
But even just like how your face lights up talking about it, I think shares a lot about what that was. I mean, you can tell that it was real, that people were very aligned and inspired by this, but having a vision that everybody was working for together. And I think it's a very inspiring thing even to think about right now while we're talking.
Well, and you know, to piggyback on that a little bit, as good as it was for the providers and the staff, and granted, it wasn't perfect, right? We had our moments. There were days where it was a struggle and we need a pep talk, and I even write about that at the tail end of the book. But the patients picked up on it,
Mhm.
and we had so many patients that wanted to come to our office, and after it wasn't long that we had to close the practice to new patients, even for the nurse practitioners who were right out of school, just because people wanted to be there. And the beauty of that is it helped with decision making. It helped us, take that little bit extra time to pick the choice that was right for the patient, given their circumstance. And it was fun. It was a lot of fun. It really was. That part of it I miss. The other component of things, I don't miss it at all.
Todd, I have like 100 more things I want to ask you, but I would like to bring Denise and Jeff in at this point if they'd like to join in on the conversation. Jeff and Denise, do either of you guys have any either questions or reflections or just like kind of comments for Todd at this point in the conversation?
Todd, I'm curious. To make a change such as that within your clinic takes somebody who is willing to, be that first crazy dancer on the hillside, if you've seen that video, and then others start to join. Did you have others that were aligned with you in the beginning and you said, hey, let's do this differently? Or were you truly saying, I'm going to do things differently? And then you slowly built that team and structure in your clinic?
That's a great question. I think in there's probably two parts to answer this. I think the first part, in terms of like inherently being part of who I am and how I wanted to practice, etc. For sure, that was me and had been me for years. The beauty of the process with the new clinic was my MA at that point had been with me for about 7 years. And Carrie, she hates change, totally hates change, which is kind of ironic actually. But she immediately agreed to come with me. So my number one ally was with me as we made this new endeavor. And then quickly, a lot of other, frankly, all-star staff wanted to join the group. And probably the most difficult part of it was figuring out which of the nurse practitioners to have us join, because there was just this huge pool of applicants. So that was quite a fun process too. And they quickly adopted our culture. So it was a little bit of both. But yeah, you're right. If you don't have somebody that believes it and lives it, it's not going to happen and things will go back to the old status quo. Um, but I've seen it happen in more than one venue too. I mean, as a flight surgeon, it was amazing. It was like being part of a family, and we're doing dangerous things and giving smallpox vaccinations and anthrax shots and all these other things. But it was like being in a family. It was incredible. And we had some incredible pathology that we found back then too, which for a young, healthy population is not the norm. But, you know, if you can find that just one person to start, just one, and you've got some capacity for reception at the higher levels, it can work. I've seen it happen, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
And it was the same system that you needed to say goodbye to, yes?
So there's probably certain times where I have to choose my words very carefully, and I imagine this might be one of them. Um, as I write in the book, I worked for Hayes Green Beach Hospital for the first, I guess, a little over 9 years of my tenure, and then we joined a system after that. So I'll leave it at that.
And so your one clinic was operating among a number of other clinics within that system?
That's correct. Probably the biggest difference is the medical leader at our clinic had no fear and was willing to say, we're not going to do that because that's a really bad idea. And we're going to do what's right for patients and providers. And I stuck to my guns. Um, in fact, one of the bones of contention was having a couple hours of administrative time on Friday afternoons. We had evening hours Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So essentially, the clinic was open from 8 o'clock in the morning till about 7:30, maybe 8 o'clock, depending on if it was me or one of the nurse practitioners there. So 4 days a week, we were essentially available for appointments for 12 hours. So to offset that, I was very adamant that on Friday afternoons, we're going to shut it down, seeing patients at 1 o'clock. Everybody can catch up on their charting. Someone will be available for messages, and we did.
Yeah.
And that became a huge bone of contention. Things were never enough. It was never enough. I'm like, we are literally open for over 50 hours a week, so anyways, so.
And Todd, so one of the lines that you wrote in your book was something about, I occasionally tell admin, no, we are not going to do that. And I feel like there's so many doctors I've had conversations with that feel like our no is not heard. We can't say no and have it be respected. And that's part of people's burnout and frustration. And so I think that was just like totally inspired me that you're like, we created a space where we can say no, and sure, like that might affect things in this way or that, but I think that's like being able to say no and stand up for yourself when it's the right thing to do and for your patients is a really important thing. And
I 100% agree with you. And I think the fascinating part of all of this is if you think about who really are the customers, it's the patients, right? And if you have a happy patient who is well cared for, you potentially have a customer or many customers for life.
yeah,
For life. They will, but that's so far from what happens at times. And it's so unfortunate because it really doesn't need to be that way.
Yeah.
We've got to get, incentives aligned and transparency and all these other things that we talk about. But it is very empowering to say no. Very empowering. It took me a long time. It's not how we're taught as physicians. We're taught to do more, do more, do more.
Yep.
Oh, you can take more, put it in a little box. Well, that's all well and good until it isn't.
Or you're singled out as a troublemaker if you say no.
Oh, I'm sure I was viewed as a troublemaker. I know I was viewed as a troublemaker. I kind of relished it, I suppose, a little bit, but yeah, I agree with you. I think if we can empower more people to speak up and do what's correct, part of that at times is to say no, that's not right.
I've been smiling a lot over the last 15 minutes or so, especially Todd, as you were describing like the origin story about, how you got to where you are and how much of your approach to doing what's right has been in you since you were a kid. I was the kid at summer camp who led the group of campers that wouldn't sit down for lunch when everyone else did because the lights on the boys basketball courts hadn't been installed and it was already a week into camp, and the best part of going to a sleepaway camp was playing basketball at night after dinner. And they were just sitting up at the top of Camp Road and no one was putting the effort into bringing them down. And we said, we're not gonna sit down and eat until those lights are brought down. It's like I was 12 or 13 at the time. So I think it's instilled in us early in life the need to advocate for what's right. And as I was reading the book over the last few days, I've had these experiences which are like almost at both ends of the spectrum of what's possible and unfortunately what is too often the case. I have a heart rhythm issue that required me being seen and cared for urgently last Friday. So I had I was fortunate enough to be able to, because my doc is at the hospital that I used to work at, I've got the opportunity to text with him and do things that most patients can't. But meanwhile, when I first tried to call and I pressed the option for a cardiac patient who's having new symptoms, I was literally on hold for 45 minutes and ultimately hung up.
Wow.
And today I went to get the prescription filled that I got sent home on. They sent me home with a starter bottle of a month's supply with nothing being paid out of pocket yet from me, which was great. Today I went to the pharmacy and they said, "Do you know what the price is?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, it'll be $530. I said, "All right, well, that's not something I'm going to do." So, and then I got a call from my cardiologist later this morning, and we had a terrific conversation, and he told me things to do, including cost plus. And anyway, it just shows like what's possible, but it's possible mostly because prior relationships and I'm getting like VIP status, and it needs to be the way it is for everybody and have everyone treated as though they are the VIP that they are.
Well said. I completely agree with you.
So
I'm wondering, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, Jeff. I just saw Denise had a question in here, so maybe we can get to that when you're done.
well, just your thoughts, Todd, about how to overcome some of the system reasons why things are the way they are. Because we use the word dysfunction, but as I've shared with Gabe before, some are benefiting from things being the way they are. So for many of the forces that are kind of like the villains in the story that you write about so eloquently, things are working out fine for them. So
That's interesting you say that. I because that was a big driver behind my quote on the back of the book. And for those that have the ebook, you might not have this. And so I'm going to take just a second. I said I envision a ripple of change following my version of the Pareto principle. If I draw blood from 20% of people by ripping the band-aid off, the other 80% can start to heal. And I agree with you. There is a small subset, and 20% might be overstating a little bit, but I was using the Pareto principle. So, anyways, the point I was trying to make is the things we say are going to negatively, or the things Josh and I talk about are going to negatively impact a certain subset of the reader and or the group involved in delivering healthcare. But the reality is the vast majority of people can benefit by having a what we call a bare bones approach to present when things are getting frustrated. And I think the more people that speak up, including patients, a lot of patients probably aren't aware that there is supposed to be some transparency in terms of billing on hospital websites. A lot of people don't know that. The more people that can start to feel comfortable to challenge or be creative disruptors of the status quo, we can make a dent. And so I agree. Yeah, it's not going to be one magical thing that we can do, but if there's hundreds of us and then thousands of us and then hundreds of thousands of us coming at the dysfunctional components of the system with a similar nomenclature,
Yeah.
it's going to be like the AARP's success with some of the change in the prescription drug costs, and I'm butchering that quite a bit, but yeah, I agree with you. Totally agree with you.
Well, and I echo that, Todd. If one of us raises up like a gnat, we can get squashed down so easily. If we swarm together, then we can cause a disruption, and that's what's needed.
Amen.
Denise, did you want to follow up with that
Yeah.
question in the chat?
The earlier questions I was asking Todd, I was kind of leading up to getting that sense of you created transformation within your clinic in a closed space, but you weren't in isolation within your system. There were peer clinics or other. I'm curious if you were starting to see the evidence of what you were creating there pan out in the numbers that so often actually move the decision makers to see things. Were you seeing any of the evidence yet?
Uh, that's that's an interesting question. On a smaller scale, absolutely, I think it worked. It definitely trickled up the food chain. When we made that transition, it was difficult to get the traction at the higher levels. And I may have sent more than one email to many administrators outlining some of these concerns. So it wasn't for a lack of trying. In fact, I would even tell my colleagues, like, look, I've got no fear. You guys tell me what battles you'd like me to fight, and I'm going to try and fight them, for better or for worse. And obviously not all of them, but after a while, when you don't get the energy at a certain level of the system, you're like, I'm just going to focus on my microcosm because that's going well and that energy is working where this isn't. So ultimately, my hopes for the larger scale where I was didn't pan out, and that was a big part of the reason why I took the chance and took the road less traveled. You know.
Todd,
You know how your
I think
clinic,
there's a place for you to teach others of us like how to not be held back by fear. Because I actually I think that word comes up, and it's part of why we're stuck.
Yeah, actually, in the book, one of my colleagues, Dr. Francis, he writes a couple components to the book, and two of the things that he mentioned was the culture of fear. That's a major problem, because you don't foster innovation, you don't foster improvement when people are afraid to speak up, and it's very much against a just culture too, in my opinion. That's just very problematic to have those kinds of things. The other thing he talked about, which is also I quoted him, he talked about it's the evil I know. I'm like, oh my Lord, that there's nothing positive about that statement at all, saying, how do we tolerate this? Well, it's the evil I know. How are we working in a system where it's the evil you know? It broke my heart when he told me that. And of course that made it into the book. But these are the kinds of things where if one person talks to the CEO, maybe you don't get anywhere. If 20 doctors say the exact same thing, and then some of them actually leave as a result of some of their concerns, people are going to start to wake up, and I go back to my decision to do this, and I feel like I talk about throwing little pebbles into the pond all the time throughout the book. I feel like some of the pebbles I've thrown have the potential to turn into a tsunami, or at least I hope they do.
I hope so too. I very much hope they do too. Todd, so as we come up on the hour, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been really really enjoyable for me, and I hope it has been for you and the others as well. I think that you stand for something that's really good, and this idea of spreading a ripple that turns into a wave of something bigger really resonates with me, and I hope it will with other people too. I already have some ideas of some connections I'd like to make for potentially some podcasts that you might consider being a guest on, because I think getting the stories and getting the word out there is a big part of how we make a difference. I would like to know if you have any call to action that you want to share with anybody who might be listening to sort of bring this together, and then at the end of the hour I'll stop the recording and we can chat just a little more if we want to, or if we all have to go, that's fine. We can kind of go into asynchronous mode after that. But do you have something that you would like to ask of anybody who might be listening to this, or anybody who reads your book, for a call to action?
I think the one thing I would say is we are not alone, regardless of what your struggle is, or you are not alone, regardless of what your struggle is. There are others who are experiencing or have experienced similar things. Ask for help. Start talking about the quadruple aim, if you will. I would prefer if you said our quadruple aim. Get some traction. You know, choose a fight, if you will, and go for it. And don't be afraid. Um, that would be my call to action.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Todd. I'm just going to stop the recording here, guys.